Good afternoon. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter School Association. Welcome to our weekly Tuesday webinar. Thank you to the hundreds of you who joined us last Thursday to discuss civic empowerment with Assembly Speaker Hasty and Bronxborough President Ruben Diaz Jr. Thank you again to the many of you who also continued on into this unplanned second hour to participate in the beginning of this important conversation on race, justice, and equity. We ran long last week, but you hung in there, and I appreciate it. We will do it again, as I said last Thursday, was the kickoff of the series that we will convene monthly, focusing on race and continuing the important conversations that we're having. Please come back and join us again next month for that Thursday webinar. You'll see the date soon. And our topic will be diversity in education, and looking forward to sharing more details with you in coming weeks. If you're interested in participating, if you have any ideas or suggestions, please let me know. Two more updates for you before we turn it over to David, Susie, and Aaron for their updates. The first update is that there is on the federal funding. So there's still no agreement on a federal bill that would provide additional state and local funding. And that funding, as you know, is essential for us to avoid cuts in education. And so we're looking for that on the state level. The governor has called for that. We've done our advocacy on that. Congress is due to break for much of July and August. And the implication for charter schools and just education generally is that we may not be able to hold as a state. The governor may not be able to avoid implementing those cuts. So we're looking to very closely at what Congress is doing, hoping that they get their work done before they break. But we wanted to give you that update that we don't see an agreement at this point, and they are scheduled to break soon. In addition, we're looking for tax revenue to come in with the state. Those numbers will not be available until early August. So the current uncertainty, unfortunately, will continue. We will be watching that, and we're looking for some updates, like I said, between now and through the summer. And finally, wanted to make everyone aware of two great resources. Harlem Children's Zone is hosting an emotional wellness summit on June 24th. If you're interested in participating, the link to register is in the chat or will be shortly. Also, if you haven't already, check out our listing of summer resources available to schools and families on our website. Happy Camper Live has let us know that they want to support the great work that schools are doing and are willing to give some free and discounted access to ensure all students have access to resources and activities this summer. If you're interested, please let us know. All right, now diving in. You all know who's here, but I'll introduce our esteemed guests anyway. I feel like they're family at this point. I am joined today by Susie Carello, Executive Director of SUNY Charter Schools Institute. David Frank with a haircut, Executive Director of Charter Schools Office at NYSED. Angeli Matos, Executive Director, Policy and Operations at New York City Department of Education. Welcome back. Aaron Cochran, Managing Director in the same office. And Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center. Welcome all. We'll start out as we do. David, Susie, and Aaron, if you have any updates. David, we'll start with you.
Great. Well, big update is the haircut. We actually we're almost in phase 3 here in the Capital Region, and I held out, but I went 7 o'clock one morning, and the person cutting my hair was wearing a face shield and a mask and gloves, and they took my temperature, and I was wearing a mask. So still abiding by state guidance, as I'm sure you would all expect of me. And but I can't even express the social emotional benefits it had on me personally to get a haircut. But I do hope everyone is well. And
it's the best way to lose weight.
Exactly. Exactly. And I shaved too, if anyone noticed. But we are actually, Michael said it before we joined the call, this is our 14th Tuesday call. It doesn't seem like 14, but we're almost at the end of the 1920 school year. And we sent out our monthly newsletter to all Board of Regents authorized charter schools, and I had some remarks to our graduating seniors, or any graduates really, in Board of Regents authorized charter schools. So If you haven't seen that, feel free to email me and I'll be more than happy to send that your way. We also sent out some guidance on summer school programs, and charter schools are allowed to implement summer school programs. We consider it to be, the Board of Regents for our authorized schools, we consider it to be a non-material revision. Shouldn't be a tough process. We updated our revision guidance just to provide some more clarity. But if you were already approved for a summer school program, no need to reach out to us. If you haven't offered summer school in the past and you want to, then just email your liaison and we'll make sure that we can get that approval as soon as possible. It only should take a day or two. So if you get us the information we need. Otherwise, I know there are going to be some other questions coming down, so I won't talk about summer camp yet because I know that's a question coming up. But I hope that all of you are healthy and safe, thinking about how we can meaningfully close out the school year, whether that's ensuring that we're measuring the academic progress of our students, and we put out some our musings on collecting data for the end of the school year, academic data through interim assessments, whether you're thinking about graduation. And actually just this morning, I sent out some updated graduation guidance from the New York State Department of Health. All of these things are ways that we can make sure that we send our students off into the summer with a bang. So thank you very much.
All right, great, thank you. Susie, would you like to provide an update?
Oh, you're on mute, Susie.
You would think after 14 times I would remember not to stay on mute. My apologies to everyone. We last week had the final Charter Schools Committee of the State University of New York Board of Trustees meeting. I am less able to see who was in attendance and able to watch there because the SUNY board office manages that for us, but I hope many of you had the chance to pop into that meeting. We took our first stab at sharing out some of the data that you all so graciously provided us in the two rounds of phone calls that the Institute team made, both right at the pivot. And again, in May, there's just a lot of good nuggets, and the team continues to mine that information. We're happy to kind of share that out if anyone needs it. In my newsletter from last week, we did send a link to that particular set of data that we shared. So as always, if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out. We were also able to, the trustees also granted this year's State Stimulus Fund awards. It's a small pool. It used to be such a big pool when there were so few charter schools way back 20 years ago, and now it's a very small pool given all of the schools that are interested in accessing those resources. So we had 16 applicants. Thanks to every applicant. We were able to get them out to 8 schools across the state, both SUNY authorized as well as Regents authorized. And I think that's my update.
All right, great, thank you. Hi, Erin, do you have an update?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. One update on our end for authorizing is that Lori Hazley, who leads the authorizing team, will be transitioning back in over the next few weeks. So at some point in the near future, she'll be joining these calls and I will be hanging up my authorizer hat, at least temporarily. So just a heads up that you may start to see Lori on some emails and calls in the next few weeks, and we are so excited to welcome her back.
You just have to tell her that her ticket to ride is going to be baby pictures.
Yes, obviously, and for everything, of course, yes. On the question of summer school, we are asking our schools that if you're planning to run a summer school program this summer and have not in the past, please email charter oversight at schools.nyc.gov to keep us in the loop and so we can review your plans. And those are our updates. But yes, baby pictures in demand.
Great, thank you. Then we'll turn to the questions received in advance, and then we'll field any questions in the Q&A. So we'll get it started. We've received some questions from schools that want to do everything they can to reach their students this summer, and so I've contemplated becoming a summer camp in order to fall under the regulations allowing summer day camps to resume operations after June 29th. What feedback or guidance would you offer to schools who are considering this?
I'll dive in, and then I can, David probably as the state education department has something to say about it as well. We kind of talked about this internally, and one of the things that we're not clear on is the charter schools' authority to operate as a summer camp. Again, by virtue of the way the Constitution in the state of New York works, the regions made you a not-for-profit education corporation with the authority to operate charter schools. And so what we have not been able to suss out, and so maybe David will have a little bit more about this, is kind of what your legal standing is to do that. But as we talked about it internally, and thanks, big shout out to Mr. Ralph Rossi for helping me think this through. A couple of things, of course, you'd want to understand, you know, kind of what the liabilities are and make sure that your insurance liabilities covered that. And then we also wondered if, you know, there are any distinctions between a summer camp and kind of a continuing school education program. And again, that's going to take a little bit more kind of legal looking and maybe some opinion from the state education department. And to the extent possible, you know, it may be that there are summer camps that have slots available where you might provide scholarships for your students to attend those summer camps as just an alternative thought to providing your own, jumping through the hoops to provide your own summer camp program. So that's kind of where SUNY stands on it. We're of course happy to think through any individual situation if you just give us a call.
Okay, great. David, we'll jump to you.
Yeah, so our position would be that as long as it serves an educational purpose, that, you know, technically a charter school could operate, you know, I should rephrase that. If it has an educational purpose, it's feasible that a charter school could operate a summer camp. However, you should talk to your legal counsel about that. However, the barriers to running a summer camp are immense. You just can't open up a summer camp. Actually, I'll share the link of all the regulations that are required. So unless you already have permission to operate a summer camp today, chances are you will not be able to go through all the hurdles, the planning, the inspections, the interviews, the filing of permits to open up a camp for the summer. However, there's nothing that says you can't partner with another entity to operate an academic camp. However, again, I would caution you to talk to your legal counsel, as you cannot charge money to do that. The Education Law, Article 56, prohibits charter schools from charging any fees to access academic programs. And you would have to ensure that it's compliant with your charter as well. So there's a number of barriers to it. It would probably be a lot easier to operate as a remote summer school rather than an in-person summer camp. But if this is something that's a make or break for your school, you might want to strategize with your counsel.
Yomika, if I could just jump in quickly, I would just only say that there are resources, some of which are already on our website, of existing virtual summer camp options that are willing to customize their resources to include, again, virtual, which we know is good but not great, academic resources for students. But I would just echo what David would say. Since we received this question, I did about 5 minutes of looking at the state requirements to become a certified summer camp. And I think the first barrier is that you have to apply 60 days before the first student would attend. And so I think it's going to be a very difficult needle to thread, if not impossible for the current context.
Okay, great. And Erin, is there anything that you might want to add?
No, nothing to add to what Susie and David mentioned. I think the only other consideration that we're always thinking about anytime we're talking about bringing people physically together is what transportation looks like. Do we want to encourage students to be on subways at this point or over the summer? So I think that that's just another thing to think about as you're evaluating all of your different options.
Thank you. It's the time of year when schools begin the reconciliation process with their students' districts of residence. Any suggestions or things to highlight as they begin this process this year? In particular, if any districts have atypical responses, like requiring additional proof of ongoing student enrollment, what should they do? And Erin, we're going to stick with you.
Well, first off, I would say if you have specific questions, particularly for the DOE, and perhaps Anjali will touch on this later in the larger billing question, but I would say as a first step, definitely reach out, in our case, to us, to charter schools at schools if you have some kind of unique situation. But I would just say that we always encourage schools to maintain the addresses in ATS to keep them up to date. That's the source of record for the state. And so we would just encourage you to continue doing that to the best of your ability and to reach out if you have some kind of unique situation that you want to walk through.
All right, great. Susie, we'll jump to you next.
Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
See, it's going to happen every time. Apologies, Yumika, can you, I got distracted by the mute.
Sure. It's the time of year we're talking about the reconciliation process. So schools are beginning that. Is there any suggestions or things that you would highlight as they begin the process for this year? For example, if districts have atypical responses, ongoing proof of ongoing student enrollment might be example. What should they do? What do you recommend?
So first and foremost, do reach out to us. Let us know, and we have a good perspective on what's unusual or outside of the kinds of things that districts could normally ask for. And again, given the executive order and the kind of lack of standardization in terms of attendance and other pieces, we're happy to talk you through how best to state the information that you're being asked for, so that it's not anything extraordinary.
Okay, great, thank you. And David, do you have advice or suggestions on this question?
Yeah, I would just be very cautious that you want to make sure that you're not putting in per pupil invoices that are wildly above the number of students you expect to have, that you're paying attention to students that you haven't had any contact with over the past few months. Is it reasonable to think that they'll be back in September when you're billing for them? I think that it's always better to be conservative rather than owing the district a lot of money at the end, but also being thoughtful about what your enrollment policies are to make sure that you're sticking to what you already have approved, and that if you do need to change those enrollment policies, that you not implement any changes until you get permission of your authorizer before doing so.
Okay, thank you. And our final question is following up on a theme from last week. As schools are working on their annual reports, what should they do for categories or goals where there aren't traditional answers, for example, student attendance?
One of the things that we would love to see is have you describe for us what you did in terms of attendance this year. I think we generally ask this question in both rounds of phone calls, so we have some of the information, and it doesn't certainly need to be a tome, but how you structured counts of things I think we also have some guidance around, you know, how you report out if you assessed the progress of students, what that looks like. So for us, if there's not a traditional answer, make sure you give us the context for what you did, kind of count, and then give us the information that you have collected.
Okay, David, we'll jump to you now.
So so schools should look at their continuity plans to make sure that to see what they've put in those plans regarding attendance. They should look at their authorizer approved policies on attendance to see what's already been, what is already in place. Schools should not deviate from those, again, without permission of the authorizer. Regarding other goals, we want schools to continue to think about how they close the achievement gap. And so how are you measuring those achievement gap, progress towards closing the achievement gap, rather, with non-traditional measures? Again, we put out some guidance, and I'll share it in the link in a second, on some measures that schools might want to consider. But again, I would go back to see what have they proposed in that continuity plan in order to show progress.
Okay. And Erin, do you have any thing you want to add on that question?
The only thing I would add is I think that we want to balance having you definitely reflect on the goals as they're written to the extent possible. But as I think about a lot of the goals that the DOE authorized schools have, they're very particular about very specific metrics related to state tests, related to survey results, and the data for that may just not be there. So knowing the great efforts that a lot of our schools go to be fully complete with all of your paperwork, I just want to say we're not asking you to run some kind of regression to estimate what student test results would be based on IA scores. So I think that if a data point truly is not available and you have reflection to offer that based on data, based on your remote learning plans, based on data prior to school closing, please provide that for a really full picture of how your school is doing and reflecting. I think that's the key thing. But please don't bend over backwards to invent data. It doesn't exist is what I would say. And I think the other side of that is just keeping in mind that we're aware that a lot of these metrics are going to be really off kilter this year. And so just because something is going to have a different interpretation, we would still ask you to present that data. For instance, if for whatever reason your cash flows are interesting this year because you had to purchase a bunch of devices, we still want you to reflect on any goals related to your cash flows because it's the data point that is available. And we completely understand and we'll bring the full context of the situation as we look at that reflection.
I would just add, I would just point out, I agree with Erin that schools should not make new goals. Those goals are in your charter. And so you should still report on them, but schools should endeavor to use the information they have at hand in order to answer those questions, answer those goals rather.
Yeah, and if I could just put on my advocate hat, what I would say is these are public documents and you all have been busting your collective rear ends for many months to do right by kids. And so you should not treat this as just a just the facts, ma'am exercise, right? You should take every opportunity to, especially where you don't have like a traditional response, to talk about the work that you've done to engage families or to assess student progress or any of those things. Like, don't forget to look at these documents as public documents. They are an annual report of the nonprofit entity that is your school, and it can be as much of a cheerleading exercise as you are able to invest the time to do.
Okay, great. And Anna, I'm actually going to turn it back to you for any questions from the Q&A.
Fantastic. We have a bunch. So David, I'll hit you first. Very technical, specific question, so hopefully quick and easy. For SED authorized schools, how and when are 2021 budgets due to be submitted?
I love technical questions. So we collect budgets with the financial data collection on November 1st. So no need to submit the budgets to us before then, unless you'd like to talk to your liaison about specifics in the budget, or if you're putting in some type of revision, but November 1st in our new ESSA fiscal transparency data portal.
we need a like a fist bump, you know, signal for that now every time.
I'm going to get
that.
a Zoom background.
That's the fiscal transparency portal. Great. So then a bunch of questions related to summer school and summer programming. So first, if schools are just making virtual resources, tutoring available over the summer, it's not for credit, it's just about being in touch with students, catching them up. Do they need any sort of approval? Do authorizers want any sort of communication about this, or is this something that schools can just continue to do because they're really working hard to do right by families?
I always think it's a good idea to keep us pesky authorizers in the loop. I would say that it benefits you as a school, CYA, and then you can have those conversations with the authorizer about whether or not it is a change. You know, where the line is, I'm not sure. You know, to go from you just have to let us know to, or as my friend Sally Backover used to say, you know, we don't need to know if you're going from French fries to tater tots, but we do need to know if you're changing your program. And so I would just let your liaison know, and then you can go from there.
Thanks, Susie. Aaron, any thoughts?
We would love to know as well, and I'll just you know, weave this in with Anna's prior comment, which is if you are providing continued opportunities for supports, whether it's tutoring or summer school, do let us know, so that we can again capture the parts of the story that you guys are doing such extraordinary work. I would also say that unless, and just one caveat is, unless you have already had in place a policy with regard to acquisition of skills or credits for a summer school program that you've kind of had in the past, this is not the time to start up a new summer school program and have it accrue any negative consequences to students. So whether that is, gosh, we told you you needed to come for summer school, even if it's remote, and we didn't hear from you for summer school, so, you know, we can't move you forward. This is not the time to start something new. And if you are thinking about something new in terms of what you're going to require of students, in terms of completion, if you are thinking about that, then we do want to talk to you.
Makes sense. Aaron, any thoughts?
Yeah, we would co-sign that. I think what David and Susie said, definitely. And I think that also from the perspective of if you are a school, I think we've all been talking about potentially dire budgets. So we would want to have a conversation if you're prioritizing some kind of summer enrichment programming over potentially other things that would be happening during the following school year. So we would definitely want to have that conversation.
Great. And then one more sort of summer school question that I think is more specific to high school specifically. So for schools that are looking for the online summer program to be part of the Regents exemption, does the 45 hours of seat time apply, or could there be content standards that make it sufficient for the online courses to receive credit, which historically has not been possible? And if so, I'll add something. Matt Gill asked this question. I'll just add a little asterisk and say, in that context, who is determining content standards? And David, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn to you first because this is sort of part and parcel of the Regents amendments to policies that allow for credit for online learning in this context.
So if you look at page 6 of the document I just shared in the chat, you'll see that the regents did pass emergency regulations last Monday, where they did provide that summer schools that provide the equivalent of 45 hours of instruction shall be the equivalent of 1 semester of work for each subject to provide flexibility for summer school instruction during the pandemic. So I would say that if you're providing the equivalent of 45 hours of instruction, you certainly can, 1, award credit, and 2, your students could partake in the regents exam waiver. Sorry, tongue twister there. And so the requirements, the current regulations are all in that presentation that I shared, again, on page 6.
Thanks, Susie. Erin, any additional thoughts? Awesome. All right, so last question before I hand it over to Corey and Anjali for New York City DOE specific questions. So Denise asks, she's seen some schools, and I've seen something similar, that have started to communicate to parents and staff in particular. I've seen this in some districts with friends of mine who works in districts, their reopening plans. And those communications have been broad, right? Either in terms of communicating a range of possibilities, or even saying that, TBD if students will return to school in the fall. And so Denise's specific question is that she thought the guidance was to continue to wait for directives, either from the state or from the Regents Working Group or any of those things. So thoughts from you all about communicating to staff and families about the degree of certainty about the plans, as well as continuing to wait for additional guidance.
So want to go, Susie? Go ahead.
I think it's great. Listen, that we are back in a moment of uncertainty about what the possibilities are, and what any limitations might come forward. So I note the following, that, right now there's not a governor's executive order for next year, and no SUNY authorized charter school has in its charter a remote or blended learning approved plan. And so in the absence of some statewide opportunity to do blended or full-time remote learning, SUNY would require that as an adjustment to the plan at some point. I've been really clear in saying that guidance coming either, whether it is in the form of an executive order for next year or from the state education department. And I got the feeling there was some of that forthcoming potentially from the working group. And my crystal ball doesn't extend to what they're going to put in that. I have had lots of conversations with many of the names that I see listed as attendees about the kind of regulatory relief or other things that we should be asking and talking about and I'm doing that. But I don't have the answers yet. And so the danger in communicating to parents that it's going to be this exact program in the absence right now of understanding what the state is going to do is that you may have to pivot. And of course, we've established that you are all expert pivoters, but it may be if a school tells their staff that everything is going to be remote next year, and the state says in order to get a tuition payment for those children, you have to have a blended model, then you're going to have to pivot or raise a lot of money. So I'm sorry that this it is the uncertainty here, as you might expect, is very challenging for the authorizers too. So you should communicate to your parents what you're actively hoping for, and your staff what you're actively hoping for. But my humble advice is to let them know that nothing is final until we get some greater guidance from your authorizer or from the state.
I would wholeheartedly agree with what Susie said. The state education department, Board of Regents reopening task force had their first convening earlier this week, and we're really glad that 12 charter school leaders from across the state are participating in those. They were appointed to that reopening task force, and so there is charter voice as part of that. But we don't know what will transpire in the fall, and the regents have been clear that the guidance will take into account the three eventualities that will either be having all in-person instruction, that will be having some blended model, or that will be completely remote. And unfortunately, we'll have to wait a little bit longer as that task force presents their findings to the governor's task force, and then that they come out with further guidance. We will not expect reopening plans from schools until that guidance comes out, and then as a plan is required by the governor or by the authorizer. So it's difficult, but I would adhere to the advice that Susie gave regarding having frank conversations with your stakeholders that include teachers and includes parents and includes your board and community members if applicable.
Thanks, Erin. Any final words?
No, I don't have anything to add other than that I can completely understand that it may help stakeholders to feel like in the loop. I know that we all are looking for guidance, and so to the extent that it's possible for you to share what you're thinking or the different considerations that you're making rather than nothing may be helpful, just to help stakeholders understand that you are doing some deep thinking on this. But yeah, nothing additional to add.
I think that's so right, Erin, and I would just add that for every minute that people are spending waiting for the guidance, use that minute to reach out to your school community, in particular parents, because I think that there are a lot of inputs going on right now about how many students can potentially be in a building or on a bus or things like that. But you know, my personal recommendation is if you have the ability to assess parents' willingness to send students back to school under different conditions, you would gather a lot of incredibly valuable information for when any of that guidance does become more formal, because you can make all the plans that you want about bus runs or schedules and alternating schedules, and if half or a quarter or a third or none or all of your families aren't comfortable sending students back under certain conditions, it's a huge input, and I think would be really valued by those families in particular. So just a couple of quick voiceovers before I hand it over to Corey and Anjali. Someone asked in the Q&A, will we continue these Tuesday webinars through the summer? The answer is yes, and in particular until this guidance is put out and until these plans are due. And thank you to folks who we rely on every week to be resources for their willingness to do that. It feels like a very critical time and hard one to be putting a pause on sharing this free flow of information, if you will. And then one other, just the only sure date that is out there right now in terms of guidance, someone asked about the task force. The Regents task force has committed that their feedback will be shared out in some format at the Regents meeting in July, which is on July 13th. And so we will be providing the opportunity for people to live stream if you want to get a notification about when the charter component of that meeting starts, but we will also be purposefully capturing and live streaming the content from the task force guidance, and we'll be sending out an update after that. Everything between now and then, so the governor's office has said that there will be feedback, there will be guidance in June, and plans will be due in July. And so that is a little bit more vague and potentially different. All those things I think are continuing to gel on the back end, but July 13th is one hard and fast date that is out there, and we will be providing a couple of different resources to access that information once it's available. All right, so with that, Corey and Anjali, handing it over to you, New York City ladies.
Hi, sorry, good afternoon, everyone. So Anjali, we're gonna start where I think most people think we are going to start, with NYC DOE. Last week, those of you who are in co-located space received what was called preliminary social distancing capacity metrics for your school and your space. And as you can imagine, there have been lots and lots of questions from schools, ranging from why are these coming out now? How has they been arrived at? Are these going to be finalized? Are these mandates? What do we do? And so Anjali, I just wanted to put that out there. What, if anything, are you going to be able to speak to about that today? And then kind of what you are going to be doing as a process point going forward on this. And you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Hey, Corey, can you hear me?
And now, yeah.
Whew, okay. All right. This Wi-Fi is very unstable. Sorry about that.
Good day.
Do me a favor, Corey. You cut off in the last part of that question. Could you repeat for me?
Of course, yeah. So I was reframing for folks, particularly those in the DOE co-located spaces who last week received their preliminary social distancing capacity utilization numbers for opening in the fall that we've received, as you can imagine, and I know you have, lots and lots of questions. And what, if any, are you able to speak to today kind of about either the background of how these numbers were derived, what's the process going forward? These were called preliminary. What does that mean? And kind of just give folks an idea of where DOE is in this process, which started, I think, with this email last week.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, Corey. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the question. And I'll start by saying that we have, we're working with our colleagues over in the Office of District Planning to set up a webinar for hopefully within the next week or so to take more questions and to be more specific with this. I don't have a ton of information to share today, so it's going to be very high level. So again, keep an eye on another webinar that we're organizing in approximately a week or so. And so the letter that you received last Thursday, as Corey mentioned, does include preliminary capacity. And we're calling this preliminary because, as you all know, we're still working very much on how the fall is going to look. Nothing is finalized yet, so this may change. And of course, we will keep you updated as things develop. But the idea behind sending this was to allow schools to continue thinking about how they would operate with a reduced capacity, with all this uncertainty, right? And to start thinking through the questions of how you would program, how you would alter your schedule, how you would continue to factor in remote learning, et cetera. All of which we know you are likely, actively engaged in, but we wanted to provide that information to support your planning purposes. In addition, we did include in the letter sort of some details around your capacity, right? And then in short, we've accounted for approximately 65 square feet per person with one adult in the room. And we use the principal annual space survey plus any known changes due to proposals, et cetera, to determine room counts. And that's all in the letter, and that's all I have to share for now. And looking forward to talking more about this in the next week or so. In the meantime, there are a few links in that letter that you should become familiar with. And I'm going to put them in the chat right now. 1 second. Oops. All right. For some reason, I can't message everyone. Oh, yes, I can. That's a lie. All right, so you have the links in the chat right now. So we have included a few links. So a link to submit questions and a link to a live FAQ that we're going to be maintaining as schools submit their questions. And in addition, there's a survey in the letter that we're requesting that principals, school leaders complete as well. So please do complete that as soon as you can. Let's see. For some reason, Corey is not allowing me to actually send it to the chat.
Okay. Maybe I can try, or Erin can try to send it. I haven't tried to send anything in the chat recently.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind. And actually, I have a shout out for Erin, actually. So Erin Cochran was behind the scenes supporting our teams, you know, to get the letters out. As you can imagine, that's a very big task. So thank you. Kudos to Erin.
Got it. So a couple of follow-ups that have come in on the chat, was wondering if you have an answer to them. The first is, for those charters in private space, obviously they did not receive a letter. Is there a way that they could view what the letter said? And I think what they probably mean is kind of what the assumptions were, not necessarily an allocation for an individual school, but how did DOE come to that? And you mentioned some of them with the 65 square feet and the one teacher, but is that something that you would be able to share, the charter office could share with all the charters?
Let me come back to that, Corey.
And then the other question I'm seeing in the chat is, if you are in co-located space or DOE space, but you didn't get a letter, what should you do?
All right, so if you are in DOE space on your own, meaning you're in a DOE building, however you can't, you don't share space with a district school, then you didn't receive a letter. That was intentional, right? We have more thinking to do around that. But if you do share space with a district school, please email us and we're happy to follow up. So you can email charterschools@schools.nyc.gov.
Great, thank you. And then we also saw one of the big things that came out last week was the guidance on the end of year closeout. And I can see a question in the chat, and then we've also been getting questions before, but schools have been, is there anything that schools should be looking for if they are getting rejected, and or in the one participant's question, how long will it take to get a response? And so if you want to start with, you know, we've definitely heard from some schools that have gotten rejected. If you could explain why schools might be getting rejected for these requests, and then also how long does it take to get a response?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, so as we stated in the guidelines, we have to allow for 48 hours for our BSDs to plan, to have safety in the building, to plan accordingly with the other adults that need to access the building. And I'm seeing a lot of requests being denied due to that, right? They don't ask for access with enough time in advance. And as a reminder, Corey and everyone, if you are located or co-located with a district school where we have a rec center, a regional enrichment center, you have to ask for access 96 hours in advance. And so that's the main reason that we're seeing rejections or denials for access. Our team is pretty responsive. So you should hear back with an approval or denial within a day or so. But if for some reason it's taking longer than a day, I would say tops 2, please escalate to us and we can support you. So at the same email that Erin put in the chat, so charterschools@schools.
Got it. And so I think whoever, I already dismissed your question, so I apologize. Whoever said that they had submitted something on Thursday and they had not received a response, you should make sure you reach out to the DOE charter school office so they can follow up on that.
Great.
The other question that we're seeing, and it's in the chat as well as getting it before this, is this guidance I think went through June 26th, and so schools are wondering where's the guidance for charters who are going to need access to buildings in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that's right, Corey. So the current guidance is only good until June 26th, and we are actively working on what summer access will look like. I don't have a specific timeline yet, but we'll keep this group informed and see weekly and in this forum as well. One thing to keep in mind, we're having a number of activities in DOE spaces throughout the summer, right? So in addition to the recs, we're also going to have some food hubs. We're going to have cooling centers. We still have testing centers. So there's a lot going on. So just keep that in mind. We'll have some, similar to how the process looks now, you have to ask for access in advance. We're just trying to figure out how much time we need in the summer to get people in the building, like safety, etc.
And then another question, we get this one every week, but I'll keep asking it. Is the 2021 DOE calendar year complete?
Not yet, Corey. Not yet.
I just have to ask, just in case we all missed it. I know, I'm pretty sure we would know, but it is a question, and it's just a reminder that we're all waiting on it.
No, understand. Yep.
Someone is asking, can you confirm the closeout dates for schools in co-located spaces? So I think you just said it, but it is basically now through June 26th, right?
That's correct.
Yep. And then another question we're getting is, this again came out last week, with the chancellor making some remarks to the district schools about how he's committed to essentially purchasing the health and safety supplies, such as masks, hand sanitizers, et cetera. Will these supplies be shared with the charters who are in co-located spaces?
Excellent question. I don't know the answer to that, Corey, so I can ask.
Okay. And then I think as a follow-up to access in the to buildings this summer, there is, because the calendar is obviously not live, charters are wondering if they're in co-located spaces, are they able to go back to school earlier, which, a lot of schools in New York City go back in August, mid to late August. Is that going to be possible for this year? Mm-hmm. And when I say go back, I mean go back with students in some capacity. Doesn't mean 100% utilization, but some capacity with students in the building.
Right. So I'm gonna give you an answer, Corey, and everyone on the phone. But I want to highly caveat this answer and just say that this may change. And I don't have all the details on this yet. Look out for a C-Weekly entry confirming this. At this moment, at this time, we are not anticipating opening DOE buildings in advance of the first day of DOE start. Meaning, if you previously opened in August, or if you previously opened before the DOE opened, my understanding as of this moment is that that's not going to be a possibility getting everything that we have to do to get those buildings ready, right? So getting classrooms ready, or not classrooms, getting the building ready with whatever we're going to do moving forward in terms of shared spaces, any sort of hand sanitizer. There's so many different factors that are informing that decision. So yes, that's my answer for now. Again, if anything changes, we will let you know either through the C-Weekly or one of these calls.
Got it. Thank you. I think that schools have been asking this question for a while, and so while it might not be the answer that people wanted to hear, I think that hopefully it provides schools with some idea of where DOE is thinking and heading right now. I was able to, I believe, post in the chat the forms that Anjali had mentioned, which is where you submit your specific space or facilities related question. If you are in the co-located space, from what we've seen, this might be very site specific about your allocation. Obviously, general questions are fine too, but as Anjali mentioned, we will be hopefully holding a session in the next week or so where you can ask these specific questions, and as Anjali mentioned, make sure that her colleagues from the space facilities planning group are on as well. And then I just wanted to close, unless Anjali, you had anything else. We were able to get some of you to share some videos that you took of teachers in your school teaching students this year, or in these 3 months, I should say, And so we've compiled them. So wanted to end on a little bit of a high note with sharing a cute video that we put together at the Charter Center that we'll be sending out. But since it's out now, I got permission to send it. So I just put that in the chat as well, the memo right now. So,
awesome. Hey, Corey, can we do one last plug for summer school?
Sure, do it.
All right, so last Friday, I think, last Friday, we sent out a note with instructions for charter schools that are looking for their students to participate in district-run remote learning summer programs. So, please review that, reach out to us if you have any questions. The process looks pretty similar, if not the same, just, you will have to do this online for parents. There's a form that you fill out and give to parents that are interested, and then the parents have to look for programs like DOE summer programs. We do encourage schools to support parents if they need help. And of course, if you have any escalations, any parent that is turned away, with wrong information, please escalate to our summer team. The email is in that letter, and I believe, actually, I'm not gonna guess. Please look at the email with the details. I don't have it in front of me. That's the last thing I have, Corey.
I just want to do to say one other thing for Board of Regents authorized charter schools. We sent out a survey for parents. So if you can please send that out to your parents as soon as possible, we would greatly appreciate it, and we won't have to follow up with you. So thanks for the BOR schools doing that.
All right, I think that wraps up our show for today. Thank you all for attending. Before you go, I do want to remind you of our Thursday Deep Dive webinar at 4 p.m. We will have Alex Johnson from Building Impact and Catherine Haley from Philanthropy Roundtable, 4 p.m. See you there. Bye.
Bye.